Hello everyone, welcome back to CAMNES Studio. In this episode, we're gonna take a look, we're gonna try to understand the massive responsibility of archaeologists. Yes, let's go. Okay, before starting, I have to say two things. First, take a look at another video I did on the concept of an archaeologist. What is an archaeologist today and what you need to achieve to be such kind of a profile profession. Take a look, here is the link. Second of all, I also want to tell you, please write to our email, ask@camnes.org. Anything, whatever question you have regarding archaeology in the ancient world, the ancient past, we are going to gladly answer here on video, okay? Don't forget about this. Also, remember that you can change here the subtitles in a different language. You can put Italian subtitles, any type you want. You just have to click to the subtitles, then the little gear, and then again, you can change and pick which language you want. Okay, let's start. So in this video, we're going to try to explore what are the main responsibilities of an archaeologist. And they're quite important, as we will discover, especially at the end of the video. Okay, we're going to go through approximately, I would say, 9 questions in order to understand this important aspect of an archaeologist and archaeology in general, which a lot of times is overlooked, I think. Okay, let's start from the first question. Question number 1. What is the technical and/or academic role of an archaeologist? I've already said something in that video I linked you before, so this is going to be kind of brief. But it's important to understand that an archaeologist has the duty to excavate a specific context. He may or may not do that. He may or may not do that directly. I mean, he could have some workers working for him and he is supervising everything. But there is these two main paths, a mere technical path or a mere academic path. In most cases, fortunately, I would say, the two combine, overlap, which is important, I think, because one determines the other one. It's very important. They're complementary. While for the academic role, obviously, we're mainly talking about a professional career where you have education, academic education, and usually also a branch of research. These are two aspects of an academic path, together with, hopefully, also the technical part when you go to excavate. This is important to understand the next steps. So let's proceed to question number 2. What is the impact of whom physically does the excavation? This is a very important question because a lot of times this is not taken into consideration or not as much as it should be. This is very important. This is paramount. Who conducts the excavation will always understand better what is happening in that context. Okay, guys? Maybe it's a very linear context, very simple, evident, no problem in the interpretation and understanding of the layers and things like that. So maybe that could be redundant. But in most cases, that is not the case. You really have to try to focus, understand what is happening, because it's very difficult to understand the dynamics, the overlapping, the relationship of the different strata, as we have seen in other videos. Here's a link, for example, on the Harris matrix, understanding of layers. So, who is physically excavating a specific context will always have a better and fresh understanding, experience of the different layers. Hence, what comes after, okay? Because at a certain point, someone is going to interpret that data and make an output from that and deduct or infer or simply prove something, okay? So that is why it's very important to understand this passage and why an archaeologist actually should be doing this directly. Or at least observing, if not physically excavating, observing constantly what is happening in that context. Okay, let's proceed. Question number 3. Okay, so at that point, what is the role of excavation data? Because we're mainly focusing on that. Obviously, at that point, we have to record that data, okay? Obviously, that's not the role of the data. We're documenting what is happening. What comes after is the true role of data. It leads to research, to an output. It leads to an interpretation. That is fundamental. And this brings us directly to our 4th question, and actually our first responsibility. What am I talking about? Let's proceed. The question is the interpretation mandatory? Yes, I mean, a lot of archaeologists, understandably, reasonably, I would say, don't take that step. Don't go in that sphere. They just gather data and they present it, okay? In my opinion, and not only in my opinion, I would say, if you consider what an archaeologist is devoted to, what he is doing, what he is trying to look for, to achieve, to serve, an interpretation clearly evidenced as so, clearly marked as an interpretation, must be advanced. It is our responsibility because we have, if you're doing things in first person, as we said before, we are the ones who have gathered most information, that we have seen what is happening, perhaps connecting it to other excavation sites, other contexts, and at that point, there's going to be an interpretation, which may be false, which may be completely wrong, or maybe there in the moment, in the first years, it could be somehow credible, it could be something accepted by the scientific community, but maybe afterwards, no, it's going to be completely dismantled, destroyed. And a lot of people are afraid of this because you're exposed. You may lose credibility. As you can understand, there's a lot of social dynamics, psychological also dynamics behind these choices. But it's our duty, it's our responsibility. We must advance some hypothesis of reconstructing of that past, of that context, of what is happening, and making connections with other similar sites or other contexts that seem to appear to have a connection with our work, with our results. Let's proceed. At this point, our 5th question is how reliable is archaeological excavation data if we consider all of this? Because as we're starting to understand, it has a certain importance. If someone, because apart from our own interpretation, even others, hopefully others, will also study that data one day. So the archaeological excavation data needs to be reliable, needs to be accurate as much as possible. And there comes in, first of all, the experience of an excavator, the experience of an archaeologist in technically conducting, organizing, developing and concluding, wrapping up an archaeological excavation. Absolutely. But not only, also ethics, as we will see afterwards though. Let's proceed, because another question is arising from this. Okay, for our 6th question is, at this point, is archaeology a science? Because probably if you go in encyclopedias, you take a look at some publications and works and things like that, archaeology may be considered as a science. But a lot of people would question that. And maybe I would do also, I must admit, because the foundation of science is the repeatability of an experiment. You must have to redo what you're trying to demonstrate. And clearly, as we all know, in archaeology, we cannot do that. It cannot be repeated. Because, why? Very simply, because we are eroding, we are consuming, we are destroying that context in order to gain data. But unfortunately, you cannot redo that. Yes, you can leave portions, hopefully also for future excavation, future studies, when technology advances, when we have a better comprehension of the area, for example. So it's always a good idea to leave something if you have a small context. If you have hectares and hectares, you're always going to have some portions remaining, clearly. But apart from that, we must try to somehow understand, be aware that our discipline is not truly a science. From this point of view, again, this leads us to another question. Let's proceed. In fact, the seventh question is, what is the role of archaeometry? And that is a very good question, because archaeometry is, I would say, the true scientific branch of archaeology, because it merely and exclusively deals with raw data. And at that point, there are measurements which can be measured, there are dimensions, there are quantities. We have a production of numbers. There is reliable and scientific data, not interpretations. And that is why archaeometry, which means, as you probably know, the different analysis you can conduct on residues, on anything regarding usually biologic, but not only, residues, materials, elements of an archaeological context. Objects, soil, artifacts, structures, anything. So that is always a plus, and it shouldn't be considered a plus. It should be an absolutely 100% part, an integral part of the archaeological investigation, which in fact is supporting a little more scientifically our interpretations, our understanding of that context. Let's proceed. Okay, now we have our fundamental question. So what is the ultimate responsibility of an archaeologist? As we understand now, we're reaching our conclusions. I think you have a picture now, an idea of what is the main question here. If an archaeologist is deontologically, ethically responsible of what he is doing in his context. What do I mean? Very simple. Unfortunately, a lot of times we commit mistakes. Yes, we're human. What we do is subject to mistakes, errors in the excavation and also in the handling of the data that comes afterwards. So it can also happen in different parts of the process of the elaboration of the data, okay? But we're mainly focusing on the excavation site, the excavation part of the investigation, which is fundamental. It's the source. There we can make mistakes. Maybe we did it, someone else, doesn't matter. You have an error, you have a mistake. Some cases, you do not understand that. You are not aware of that. And at that point, it's just gonna go inside the process, and that's gone for good. You may be aware afterwards, maybe. You may realize all of a sudden that a big mistake took place during the excavation because of something. Just to give you an example, like for example, we put tags on all the different bags when we find artifacts. A lot of times you have to wash those artifacts, and usually there's students doing it, helpers, people from the villages, workers. There's lots of people that are washing, preparing these, and they may mix up the tags, they may lose them. So at that point, obviously, the data is completely lost. Now, what happens here? This is fundamental, the responsibility of an archaeologist. Why I call it massive? It's massive because in a lot of cases, if it's an important excavation, you are writing history. That is fundamental. It may be a little pretentious, but that's what happens in a lot of important contexts. Especially, I would say, prehistoric, when we're talking about evolution or when we're finding turning points in history, key archaeological sites that hold very important data. If that is not handled properly, you may introduce a mistake that changes history, literally. So that's why it's so important to know what you're doing, first of all, but also be honest with yourself. That is why I said deontologically and ethically correct. You must follow your, probably we could say, moral conducts, your moral markings. Follow them, because otherwise, in some cases, it is renowned. It's happening. It always has been happening. That some information is a little adjusted because there was a mistake, and the whole process, the matrix, the publication, the presentation at the conference, it's not working well. So you kind of have to adjust a few things. And unfortunately, that is wrong. It may occur sometimes when you're lacking some information, hence you're doing a little reconstruction. You can do that. The important is to declare that. You have to say, we're missing that. Or even, if you're very brave, and I think people, the scientific community, should somehow acknowledge this. If someone says, excuse me, I made a mistake, I lost some information, or I made a mistake in the interpretation or in reporting, in recording that data. Now it's not correct. Be aware, be careful from now on who is studying this. Sure, why not? Let's all do it. No problem. I think, as we always say, the truth is what we're seeking. So if we introduce these mistakes, errors, we cover them up, we adjust them, we're not doing our job correctly. Absolutely. Okay, so the ninth question was actually how we should deal with this. How should we treat the error and loss of data? And I already answered actually to this. We just have to be honest with ourselves, first of all, and also with the public when we make mistakes. Maybe not even something we did. That just happened. It's important to report that and make that clear that that part of the information may not be as reliable, or it's completely corrupted, and hence we have to jump that part. Okay, I hope this was not too boring and long. I think, though, these are very important concepts that especially those who are approaching archaeology must keep in mind for their future job works and field work. Okay, guys, thank you again for watching, and remember that understanding the past explains the present and defines our future. Thank you again. Bye.
Hi guys, if you want to discover more about archaeology and our ancient past from a different perspective, make sure to click on the CAMNES logo here below. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you will never miss an episode and join the archaeological community in search of the truth.